Hallo, welkom allemaal. Ik ben Marielle Swinkels van Smarter Futures en ik heet jullie als moderator vandaag van harte welkom bij de Inspiratiesessie BOF meets John Fullerton. Ik ben door Astrid Kaag samen met Joyce Bokhoven van communicatie en events gevraagd om u door deze sessie vandaag te leiden. En daar voel ik me zeer vereerd voor, omdat ik ook echt een hele warme connectie voel, in ieder geval met het thema van vandaag. In eigenlijk de beweging naar een meer generatieve economie, die ligt me zeer na aan het hart. Vanuit Smarter Futures help ik eigenlijk allerlei veranderaars al heel lang in huidige systemen bij eigenlijk het zetten van positieve stappen naar een meer duurzame, gezonde leefomgeving. En zelf heb ik daar ook een heleboel in te leren nog steeds. Daarbij ben ik ook zelf begonnen met eigenlijk het herstel van mijn eigen akker bij mij in de achtertuin. Waarbij ik een theebos aan het ontwikkelen ben. En daar ook allerlei mensen bij betrek die ook worstelen soms in huidige systemen bij het zetten van positieve stappen in die richting. Dus vandaar dat ik blij ben om samen met Joyce u door deze sessie te leiden. Ik denk dat ik nu op het Engels overschakel, want we hebben natuurlijk een John Fullerton in ons midden die alleen het Engels verstaat. Ik zal proberen langzaam te praten. Mocht u vragen hebben, stel ze gerust, ook in het Nederlands. We helpen u met vertalen, mocht dat nodig zijn. Maar natuurlijk mag het ook in het Engels. Okay, welcome everybody today. John, a very warm welcome, special welcome to you. I'm now talking in English, but I just made a Dutch intro to welcome everybody. Also a special welcome to our regional minister, Wil van Pinksteren. And of course, Astrid, the person who organized this whole event from the Brabant Outcomes Fund of the province of North Brabant. I think, Astrid, I would like to invite you to give a sort of short explanation about this session, why you started this up, and afterwards we will go further on in the program. Okay?
Okay, thank you, Marielle. So we're organizing this event in the context of the Brabant Outcomes Fund. And for the people who don't know what the Brabant Outcomes Fund is, I will give you a really short explanation, because it's a public-private financing methodology which stimulates cooperation between public and private sector and aims at scaling the societal impact of enterprises. And we are in the middle of the execution phase of the first investment round. And that's challenging because of the COVID situation, but the entrepreneurs are doing a really great job. And at the meantime, we are also setting up a second investment round, which is challenging as well, but for other reasons, because we have to do it all online, of course. And actually, this online situation gives me a kind of inspiration, or did me feel what the urgency of setting up an event like we are doing today. Because I don't know how it is for you, but for me, I really miss sometimes the informal conversations, the real human connection. And because of the online working, of course, we try to connect to each other, but it's different. And sometimes we have to focus or put more attention on the real human connection. And also what I miss sometimes is new energy, or the feeling that you are really cooperating, that you are really doing things together. Because I know there are a lot of people in Brabant really doing good things and trying to shift the system a little bit, because the COVID situation actually showed us that we have some weak points in our society, in our economy, and we need to try to find new ways to do things in a different way. And I thought it would be good to have a moment in our really full lives to relax a little bit, to connect, to get new energy, to get new inspiration. So that's what we try to do today in this afternoon. So I hope all of you will enjoy it. So I give the word back to Marielle.
Yes, thank you, Astrid. And because you already explained it, that it's very important to, well, have also this personal connection to the theme of, well, the movement we are in towards this regenerative economy. I think it's good to go out in breakout sessions for just very short 8-10 minutes and to connect a little bit together in small groups. And also to connect with the team. We are sharing our experiences today together, and also, of course, the experience of John especially. In this breakout session, I would like to invite everyone, so all 4 people in little groups, to share a little bit what your most important wish is at the moment. I think we are all change makers, and we all have our wishes, and I think it can be on a personal, private matter. It can also be a wish related to the work you are doing. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Just think about it and share a little bit for a short moment of around 8 minutes. And I hope everyone can, well, share his own thoughts on this personal wish of themselves. So, and afterwards we will come back and we will really start the program officially. Well, welcome terug iedereen. Welcome back everyone, also John. I think, well, it was a nice warming up. I hope you all experienced this little intermezzo together to get to know each other a little bit more and to connect with the team. So I think we have done a little bit of warming up, and to start with the rest of the session. Mr. Van Pinksteren, our regional minister of the province of North Brabant. He's the Minister of Leisure, Culture and Sports, and I'm really pleased that you also are here. Maybe you can explain a little bit also why, well, while the province is working on this Brabant Outcomes Fund and on this session today.
A very warm welcome to you all. Welcome to my colleagues from the province, to all the entrepreneurs, the students, researchers and other people present in this meeting. And a special welcome, of course, to John Fullerton in particular. Welcome to John in this meeting. We are very honored to have you here with us today. Unfortunately, we aren't able to meet each other live in the beautiful region of North Brabant. You said earlier this afternoon that you would come to see live here and to be live here, but it's not possible at the moment. But nevertheless, we will do our utmost to create a feeling of connection, even though online. As a regional minister, I feel a big responsibility to do the right things for all our citizens for Brabant, the environment and our economy. And more than ever, COVID-19 shows us how related these topics are with each other. We can't solve economic challenges if our citizens aren't healthy. We can't create a green environment if we focus only on growing industries. So we need to find new ways, perspectives and approaches to deal with our integrated social challenges. As a lonely stand, it's not possible to achieve the goals we want. Therefore, I am so happy that John Fullerton will share his vision to regenerative economy and share his personal story. His story can give us ingredients and inspiration for the development of new solutions, instruments and activities, because we have to try out new ways or creating a stable economy that serves the well-being of our citizens. The Brabant Outcomes Fund as an instrument is an example of this. We are looking for practices how we can support entrepreneurs who contribute to a new future-proof economy. Businesses with a positive impact on people, planet, and profit. And yes, it often feels risky to try a new approach and to develop new instruments and to use new instruments. But I think that sticking to our traditional approaches and instruments will in the end be more risky than do these new things. This will not stimulate cooperation if you use old instruments. Mutual learning and shared responsibility will not be achieved. As a regional government, we cannot achieve the new economy by ourselves. We do have to cooperate with others and to get answers on the questions we have. Therefore, this kind of meetings are very important. That is why I am happy and proud that we are here together in this meeting with people from diverse groups in our society. I am convinced that we will get new inspiration today to continue our work to build a better Brabant for tomorrow for our citizens. I look forward to what we have to tell us together and this very fruitful event. Thank you, and I'll give back to the lead of the event.
Thank you, Mr. van Pinksteren, for this warm welcome and also for offering us the space today for this exchange, because I think it's really important to exchange experiences on this topic. And that's why I'm also very pleased to announce the speaker, our special speaker of today, Mr. John Fullerton. Of course, you are from the Capital Institute, and I think, Astrid Kaag of Brabant Outcomes Fund has met you before. So before asking you and offering you the floor, Astrid, can you still explain a little bit why you especially asked John to attend to this inspiring session of today?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, why John? I think after you heard his story, you understand why. But I will give you a very short story. Because actually when I was looking for inspiration or news stories, then my friends from Thrive Institute said that why are you not trying to invite John Fullerton? And when I looked at the internet and saw what he did, and actually I realized that you cannot put him in one single box because he's a lot of things together. He works on Wall Street, he's a writer, he is an impact investor, he's a philosopher. So that's really fascinating actually. How can somebody have all these skills? And when I met him a couple of weeks ago to prepare this meeting, then I find out something else about John. And that is that John is a really good listener. And he really tries to step into your shoes and understand what your position is, what your challenges are, and what new ways are to get a step further. And I also realized that he is a really good storyteller. And when I realized that, I thought he is really the man to be in this first inspiration session, because I think he can give us a lot. And that's also why I want to ask all of you, take this opportunity and try to ask your questions to John. just listen to his story and if you have challenges on your mind and you want him to reflect on that, do it, because I know John likes it when we really have a conversation, when it's not like he's just presenting his story and everybody is listening and muted and that's it. I think we really need to take this time and really try to have an informal discussion together, because like I said, I think he has a lot to give today to us. So
thank you.
Yeah, John.
Thank you, Astrid. I think it's good that everyone puts his questions in the chat. Joyce will look after the chat, Joyce, and you will bring in now and then some questions. So feel free to put questions in the chat in Dutch or in English, it doesn't matter. And John, hopefully you are okay if Joyce will interrupt you sometimes to bring in a question. So I hope, that we will have a lovely discussion, not only a presentation in this case. Huh? Okay, John, then I think you have the floor, and we can, we are curious after your story. Yeah.
Well, thank you. And Astrid, thank you for that very warm welcome. I hope by the time we're done, you won't be still asking the question, why John Fullerton? But I'll do my best here to not disappoint after that over-the-top introduction. But I also really enjoyed getting to know Astrid and your colleagues. And as I said when we were first joining the call, I'm not only impressed with what you're all doing there, but kind of jealous. So there's so much to learn from what you're doing. And I think as I go through this idea of regenerative economics, you're going to see yourselves and recognize what you're doing in the story. And hopefully that will, in a sense, make you feel like you're not alone and there's other people thinking the same way, and hopefully even pick up some thoughts on how this shift that I think we're all going through and we all feel in our bones, I've come to believe is way bigger than we yet realize. And that's probably the big message, the big takeaway, is that we're in the midst of something that is very profound and very big. And it took me years to kind of talk myself into believing that, because there's a sense of hubris about our special moment in time. But at any rate, I think that's what's happening. Just in terms of a little expansion on my personal journey to this work, as Astrid mentioned, I spent nearly 20 years on Wall Street. I worked at JP Morgan the entire time, and I always like to refer to it as the old JP Morgan, because the culture of that bank when I worked there and the scale of it and whatnot was very different than JP Morgan today. And people always ask me why I left. I was very fortunate to kind of land in the business right when derivatives were taking off, and I did the Tokyo, London, New York, globalization thing, and it was fascinating and exciting and very remunerating, more so than any of us deserved. And yet I knew by the time I was sort of hitting 40 that somehow my life purpose was not meaningful anymore. And the definition of success that we've created for ourselves in the world of business, and particularly in finance, seemed unfulfilling. And so when the bank merged with Chase, it gave me an excuse to kind of walk away and reflect. And so in 2001, I left the business, and I had literally no idea what I was going to do next, and took the summer off. And the first day I was back in New York City to have a meeting, I'd begun to do what we now call impact investing when I was still at Morgan. I was investing in the education sector and the alternative energy sector in the private equity group. But this was before impact investing was a thing. So anyway, I had a meeting with a guy who ran a different charter school management company than the one I had invested in. And I was thinking about maybe getting involved in that whole world. And my meeting happened to be at 9:30 in the morning in Lower Manhattan, and it was a beautiful, clear day that turned out to be 9/11. And so I experienced, I got to the street from the subway the moment the second plane had hit the Trade Center. And I was far enough away, I was probably 2 subway stops away. So I was far enough away to be safe, but close enough to experience that in a very visceral way. And I wouldn't say that experience is the reason I'm here having this conversation, but for sure, it shifted me in a way that, it jolted me in a way that I'm sure had a lot to do with the depth at which I've taken on this quest really for reimagining how our economic system can possibly work on a finite planet. So with that, I have a short slide deck that if I go through that, it'll keep me more on task. So let me shift to that now and see if this all can work. Sorry. There we go. Is that working? Do you recognize something? No, I can't see you anymore. So someone just tell me.
It's working.
Okay, good. I actually was just scanning for some photographs this morning and discovered this. I hadn't seen this before, but now I definitely want to come. That looks amazing. But at any rate, most people, including the work you're doing, are very much focused on action and moving and doing things and learning by doing. And I'm a huge advocate and do that myself. And I think that's the key. We can't sit around and debate what we should do. We need to get started and learn by doing. And I also believe we need to recognize that the way we even think about the problems we're trying to solve are often subconsciously constrained by the theories or the worldview that we carry into those problems. And so the first thing I would like to say is that I actually want to make a shout out for theory, because at this moment in time, I think the theory we essentially run the world by is fatally flawed. And if we don't get clear on our worldview and our theory, we will continue to look to solve problems, and the solutions we create to our problems will continue to create new problems. And this is not the first time we've had to shift our worldview. About 500 years ago, we used to believe that the Earth was at the center of the universe and the sun rotated around the Earth, and that the shift in worldview from the geocentric to a Copernican understanding of the world forced a change in everything. It shifted us from the medieval era to the modern age. And today, instead of not understanding the organization of the universe, I would argue that we're stuck in a flawed understanding of our economic and human prosperity. And the best example I can give of this is that many of you may not be aware of this, but in 2018, the Nobel Prize in Economics was awarded to a professor named William Nordhaus, who's probably the most preeminent environmental economist in the world, and certainly after the Nobel Prize. And he was awarded that prize for his work on a model that was designed or set up to calculate the optimal global warming we should manage our planet toward. And the answer to that question was 3.5 degrees Celsius. Now, this happened only 2 years ago, at the time when the scientific consensus was clear that, and this I'm sure all of you on this call know, that the absolute threshold we needed to shoot for was something less than 1.5 degrees. And the difference between 1.5 degrees and 3.5 degrees is enormous. And so I just use this as an example to demonstrate that the economics profession and our understanding of economies and how they interact with human society as well as the planet, even at the highest levels, are still leading us to conclusions that make no sense to even a kindergartner. What I'm proposing in this talk is that we are entering into, or have entered into, and certainly this century, to me, marks the sort of no turning back moment, where we're shifting from the modern era to what some are calling the integral era. And that shift is as unsettling as the shift from the medieval era, where we sort of took our truth from the church, and the church had this direct line to God. And if we behaved the way the church told us to, we would go to heaven. And if we didn't, we'd go to hell. The modern era was defined by, or launched with the scientific revolution, and all of the great progress that science has led us has reached its limits. And the reductionist mindset of the world behaving, and we think of it as if it's a machine, has many advantages of breaking down complicated things into parts that we can understand. And all the advances in science are a result of that reductionist method. But it has this Achilles heel, which is that we've lost sight of the whole. And this new emergent integral way of thinking is the necessity to, at the same time that we use our scientific method, we zoom out and keep our eyes on the whole, and understand that, as we've understood forever, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And we're in the process of relearning that lesson on a macro mega scale, with the entire possibilities of not only humanity, but life as it exists on this planet at stake. Now, I wrote my first paper about all this in 2015. It's on our website, capitalinstitute.org. It's called Regenerative Capitalism: How Universal Principles and Patterns Will Shape Our New Economy. And the idea here is simple. And by the way, since I launched it in the United States, I use the word capitalism, but it's not your grandmother's capitalism. You can substitute regenerative economics in the title if it makes you feel more comfortable. Obviously, capitalism is now understood as being at the root of our challenge. And so it's really about the future of capitalism, the future of economics, and what we mean by capital, what capital matters, and those kind of things. But the big idea here is that none of us are smart enough to figure out how to organize a complex human economy in a way that achieves both human prosperity without undermining the stability of the ecosystem upon which we're dependent. And I have this belief that if we want to have a sustainable economy, we need to learn how other sustainable systems in the real world work, which are living systems. And this approach, the shift from reductionist, mechanistic thinking to holistic, regenerative thinking, is not just impacting economics, but it's really a whole way of seeing all domains of knowledge. And so if you go into any of these specific fields, you will see examples of this regenerative mindset emergent. In education, it looks like transdisciplinary education. In healthcare, it looks like holistic health or functional medicine. In urban design, it looks like regenerative development. In agriculture, it looks like regenerative agriculture. And so I think we're in the midst of having to rethink pretty much everything. And that's not to say that everything is wrong and bad. It's to say that we need to add to our understanding in these different domains this integral approach. And that's very hard. It's very hard to actually shift the way our minds think from reductionism to holism. And we all, myself included, constantly fall back into our reductionist thinking because it's probably by now baked into our DNA. So a quick definition: regenerative economics, and I focus on economics and finance in part because that's what I know a little bit about, but also because I do believe it's the critical root cause of all of our systemic crises. It's the way the human economy is the way humans interact with each other and with the planet, and it obviously isn't working right. And so rather than address problems like climate change, I think we need to get to the root cause, which is our economic theory and our economic models and the financial system that drives them. So the definition for me of regenerative economics is the application of nature's laws and patterns of systemic health, self-organization, self-renewal, and regenerative vitality to socio-economic systems. And I say socio-economic very intentionally. One of the problems of economics is that we separated economics from politics in order to create fields of specialty, and I think that's a false division, like most divisions, but that one in particular is one that that is not helpful to us. And this is not the first stage of evolution of our economic thinking. This visual kind of gives you a trajectory that I think is reasonably accurate. It's missing many pieces, but just for simplicity, we are struggling to break out of the chains of our neoliberal economic dogma. That's the really grounded in the idea, the simplistic idea of the invisible hand, that markets left to their own devices will solve all of our problems. We then had this idea that we needed to integrate environmental externalities into our neoliberal framework. And so you have the whole field of environmental economics, which is an essential development and advancement from pretending that the environment doesn't matter. But there's a problem with simply trying to integrate externalities into the old framework, which is that it presumes that that everything can be fixed with money. And there's a difference between a cost that can be fixed with money and a wrong that can never be fixed. And we're in the process of, damaging the very foundation of our of a healthy, balanced ecosystem on this planet. And if anyone thinks that there's any way to put a price on that, they're literally stuck in a wrong worldview, and I think that's very much where we stand. Ecological economics was a much more important breakthrough in my mind. Herman Daly is probably seen as the father of ecological economics. He introduced for the first time, believe it or not, the idea that scale needs to be factored into our macroeconomy. Macroeconomics is defined conventionally as simply the sum of the microeconomies. So it's the sum of all the households and firms and organizations sum up their revenues, and you have the macroeconomy. And what ecological economics does is it says, well, wait a second, we live on a finite planet, so there must be some limits to scale. This goes back to the famous Club of Rome book by a group of authors from MIT, system scientists, where they introduced this idea of limits to growth, which they were ridiculed for back in the 1970s, but were actually living out the truth of their prognosis back in the 70s. The trouble with a pure ecological economics framework is that if you take away economic growth, it doesn't feel very good. We know intuitively, if not explicitly, that we've designed this entire global economy around the premise of continued exponential growth. And we believe in our bones that 5% growth rate is better than 2% growth rate, and a 0% growth rate leads to all kinds of bad outcomes. And so we're stuck with this, and that's launched a whole group of folks who believe we need degrowth and to shrink the economy, and they may be right. But
John,
yeah.
John, could I ask a question on behalf of Elena?
Yeah.
He wants to know how you define economic growth then in this respect.
Yeah, that's a great question. So economic growth, and what I mean by it when I say the limits to growth, is the metabolism, the footprint, the material footprint of resources flowing through the economy. So many things can grow exponentially and create no incremental footprint or very little incremental footprint. And the whole move toward a digital economy is very promising in that sense, in that we're creating value, all kinds of value, not just economic value, through the use of digital technologies that do have an energy requirement. So we can't pretend that it's zero. But you know, if you just think about the music industry or the movie industry or the gaming industry, other than the energy use of too much data, that's a much more healthy source of economic growth than, you know, building buildings out of cement and steel and tearing them down 10 years later because they've gone out of style. So it's the quality of growth that matters. But there's an unfortunate, very clear correlation between GDP, you know, the simple measure we use for growth with all of its deficiencies, and in particular the ecological footprint of the economy. And there's data. I don't have the chart handy here today, but if you look at the Global Footprint Network, you'll see that the pandemic has caused a blip, a drop in our footprint, led by a drop in our carbon emissions. But it's a pretty small blip in the scheme of a 50-year trajectory. And of course, with the economy likely to regain steam this year, I'm sure we'll go right back to the upward sloping trajectory we were on before. So the quality of growth and what we mean by growth and development is an essential piece of this. But we won't be able to get away from the reality that with a growing population and a desire and a necessary improvement in living standards for at least, call it, half of the planet, there is an inexorable, unmistakable trend, which is that you know, we are, you know, next year will be worse for the planet than last year and the year before and the year before, unless we fundamentally redesign the way we think about economies. Which brings me to the promise and the hope and the potential of regenerative economics. The idea here is that living systems behave in accordance with this process of regeneration. So literally, while we're here having this conversation, all of our bodies are regenerating. On average, our cells regenerate every 7 years. And the entire Earth system regenerates. And that process is responsible for life on this planet. And think of the potential unleashed by life on this planet. And the idea of regenerative economics is that if we can align our economic system design with the qualities and patterns and principles that describe living systems, there must be huge potential for us to unlock, which can displace the extractive exponential growth as the source of our future prosperity. And while that sounds all well and good, let's drill down a little bit and see how that might be possible. And just as a quick aside, I haven't just sort of laid this out as if it came out of thin air. This comes from the study of a lot of thinkers, system scientists, living system scientists, ecologists in particular, as well as my own investment experience. So I've seen this happen in the real world, and I'll talk about a couple examples later. So I know this is real. I know it's possible. What I don't know is how we scale this across the entire global economy. So as a way to think about this, you know, I'm often asked, what's the difference between regeneration and sustainability? And that's gonna become, you know, top of mind question now that regeneration is becoming very much sort of the idea of the moment. regenerative this and that, and everything is popping up all over the place. In fact, Walmart has just announced it wants to become a regenerative company. So we need to get clear on what we mean by regeneration. And it is not simply a different word for sustainable. The best way I like to describe it, and this schematic I have borrowed from one of my teachers, Bill Reed at Regenesis Group. He works primarily in the built environment. So this visual was really initially focused on real estate development. And so I essentially changed a few words, added a few things, and adapted it to an entire economy. But the idea is the same, which is that we live largely over on the left. Whether we're working on sustainability or not, we need to acknowledge that we are part of a degenerative system. It is rooted in modern age mechanistic design, reductionist thinking, and we focus on parts and problems. We're incrementally moving toward a more green economy, which is great and essential. But we have this idea that if we keep doing incremental change, we'll somehow get to sustainable. And the regenerative paradigm is very different. It says that we need to leap extremely, all the way over to the right and follow natural system design. Living systems have a genius to them that has proven that they're sustainable over long, long periods of time, or they wouldn't still be here. And living systems design focuses on patterns rather than parts. And it requires this holistic thinking as opposed to simply reductionist thinking, which doesn't mean that there isn't a place for the reductionist method. It's just that we can't confuse the method for how the world actually works. It will require less energy and higher consciousness, less materials and more efficient use of materials, which is where it fits within, for example, circular economy. But the key is that there's this process, this regenerative process on the right, that if we follow, sustainability will become the outcome of that process. Now, in order to, so that's all well and good, John, but how do we do this, right? And our traditional approach to something like, to change like this is to look for measures and to look for problems to solve. And I'm arguing passionately that before we do that, we need to get clear on first principles of this regenerative process to use as our guide. Because as soon as we get into measures and metrics and problems and solutions, we lose sight of the genius of this regenerative process. And I'm not proposing that these 8 principles are the quote right principles, or that it's even possible to reduce the regenerative process to 8 principles. That's, again, reductionist thinking that we could reduce, for example, the complexity of each and every one of us as a human being to 8 principles is obviously absurd. But we do need a map. We need a map and we need some kind of a compass to guide our actions so that while we move forward and act and learn by doing, we have a reference to check and see, are we actually acting and moving in the right direction? And I've done my best to reduce this regenerative process to the least amount of patterns or principles that I can think of. In the book I'm working on now, I'm going to tweak this a little bit, but just very briefly, they are the idea of right relationship. All living systems work in symbiotic win-win relationships. This says a lot about our competitive paradigm, and that needs to be rethought. I use this concept of holistic wealth. This is my attempt to talk about the multiple capitals or the multiple forms of wealth, not just money. Innovative, adaptive, and responsive. Obviously, what you guys are working on is an example of that. I used to call this entrepreneurial, but the systems language, what ecologists talk about is actually innovation, adaptive, as well as responsive to the changing context. And so it's not just innovation for the sake of innovation, but it's innovation in the context of the bigger picture that's happening. Empowered participation is vitally important. What it means is that the health of the whole can only realize its potential if it has the participation of all of the parts in the whole. So for example, if you don't get oxygen circulating to your feet, you can't walk, you can't run, therefore you're not going to be as healthy, therefore you can't achieve your potential as a system. So that's also true in our society and in our economies, which means that dealing with inequality and injustice is not just a moral question, although it certainly is a moral question, it's actually a systemic health question. And our whole society can't be healthy if we have these extreme levels of injustice and inequality. So it gives us different reasons. In a sense, it's in everyone's self-interest that that we have the contribution and participation of all members of a society. And we need to understand that that's actually the way we become a healthy system if we do that. Honors community and place. Place is where human culture and geologic reality intersect. And so your work in your region, this whole idea of bioregionalism is very much right out of the playbook of the regenerative process. So I, again, applaud you on that. Similarly, on the edge effect, you're working across the edges between the public sector, the education sector, and entrepreneurs. That is, again, right out of the Living Systems playbook. Living systems are richest where one system interacts with another. Like, for example, where a river meets the ocean, you have these massive salt marshes where there's massive diversity and therefore opportunities for new forms of life. And yet we've organized our economy into industries, and they tend to be much more stovepipe. We've organized the academy into specializations, and they tend to not interact with each other as much as they need to. Robust circulation, as I mentioned earlier, a human economy is at its heart a metabolism, and things like circular economy, the reality that we can't exceed planetary boundaries, all of that is necessary if we're going to have a healthy metabolism in a human economy. And finally, the idea of balance. I don't think this is controversial, but there are many, many things that need to be in balance, and conventional economics is all about optimization, typically optimization of efficiency for the pursuit of growth. When in living systems, we actually know empirically that they balance efficiency with resiliency, for example. But also we need to balance the masculine and the feminine, the competitive and the collaborative. There's many, many aspects of balance that need to be realized in the regenerative process. In terms of applying this toward investment, because you're all involved in an investment project, the sustainable finance world is filled with incremental change, which is, again, all good, most of it over on the left. But when you move into impact investing, green bonds, some of the projects that I've read about that you're doing, you're moving toward the regenerative paradigm. And place-based integrated capital, which is very much what I see you're doing, is getting close. And I think we're nowhere near understanding how we need to utilize capital, which I'm calling integral capital, and ultimately even systemic philanthropy, which is a topic that essentially says we've created these massive amounts of financial capital at the expense of natural and social capital. And so we need to reinvest and recycle that money in a very systemic way in order to restore the balance between the different forms of capital that our economy is generating. Can we do this in the time frame we're talking about? I believe we have to. I think it's critical we get clear on what values really matter. And I don't just mean human values, I mean the value of life itself on this planet. I believe that it does require a fresh way of seeing the world and seeing our place in the world, and even the use of our language, like that the environment is a thing separate from us, is broken thinking, reductionist thinking. And we need to harness our technologies in alignment with this vision, as opposed to just allowing technologies to run whichever direction is the way that will optimize profits for a company. But the technologies are going to be critical for us to address these issues. Now, I know your region is rich in agriculture and lots of agricultural opportunities. So let me just drop down from the theoretical for a moment and talk very practically. I've been involved with the Savory Institute for over a decade now, and the photograph you're looking at is the result of holistic planned grazing on the right, which is essentially using large herbivores, either cattle or sheep or goats, to mimic how nature worked in right relationship between large herbivores and the grasslands. And conventional cattle grazing is what happens, what you see on the left. But using cattle and electric fence and moving them in a way that is symbiotic and essentially mirroring the way they work in nature, which a guy called Alan Savory figured out over the last 40 years, leaves you with grasslands like you're looking at on the right. Now, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that you have a much healthier system there. You're also growing a lot more grass, which means it's more profitable for a rancher, but you're also sequestering a lot more carbon, and you're essentially returning the soils under the grasslands to the natural carbon sink that they were designed to be by nature, as opposed to a carbon source, which is what is happening on the left. And because the grasslands are such a massive part of the planet, or think about grasslands and crop agriculture combined, if we shift to regenerative agriculture, we can easily sequester 1 trillion tons of carbon, which is the surplus that's now in the environment. So there's way too little attention being focused on agriculture while it's being focused on the emissions side of the equation. And just in case you don't believe this is externally validated data from a holistically managed farm in Georgia in the United States, which shows you that the emissions, and here's a great example of not focusing on problems, but looking at the situation holistically. You see on the left there, the belching of cows, yes, absolutely, is a source of carbon emissions. But the healthy management of the animals on the land overwhelms that by sequestering carbon in the soil, which is that -35. And so you see that the net of this across this entire integrated farm, and it's a fairly, it's not a large farm in the context of industrial agriculture, but this is, several hundred acres at least of farmland in the United States. And it shows you the carbon impact of conventional industrial beef, which generates 33 pounds of carbon equivalent in the atmosphere per pound of meat. But even the plant-based foods, Beyond Burger and Impossible Burger, because the feedstock of those are grown with industrial agriculture, have a carbon footprint, whereas the white oak pastures has actually a negative carbon footprint while growing protein that people want to eat. So that's a holistic solution to the problem of climate change, but also water retention and biodiversity in the soil. Many, many other things are solved all at the same time. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit just because I want to get to the discussion, but I'll just quickly say there's a really interesting opportunity in which I think, could have lots of application in Holland, given your greenhouse expertise. But the aquaponics, there's an opportunity with integrated aquaponics and hydroponics to essentially displace the grain demand that is doing so much destruction. Grain is an annual crop which destroys soil, which is fed to chickens and hogs and cows. If we can displace that with grass-fed protein like tilapia, we can essentially create the demand for farmers to grow grass to feed to the tilapia fish, which then has the systemic impact of sequestering carbon while producing low-cost protein that humans desire to eat. This idea of regenerative actually is, if you look through the lens of these 8 principles, you can see it showing up in certain technology companies. So this is not just an agriculture concept. In fact, the internet itself has been a massive leap forward for the circulation of information. And so the metabolism of a human economy is not just materials and energy, but it's also information and even empathy. And so companies that have business models that are not extractive, like the ones on the right, are actually aligned with this regenerative economy that we're trying to imagine. Whereas technology companies like the ones on the left are actually quite extractive and degenerative, even though they're leveraging the same technology. So it's not about technology, it's about how we use technology. And then just to wrap up, a couple of things that might be useful to you all. On the website, on our website is, we've done about 7 years of storytelling about regenerative projects. And there's even a whole section on there that is what you're looking at, which is the my colleague Susan Artarian-Chang, who did this work. It's her reflections on that 7-year process of storytelling about the emergence of regenerative economies. And so there's lots of case studies, but more importantly, there's the stories underlying them. And I think that's where you kind of grasp or grab the human passion and attention is in the storytelling much more than in the abstract theories. So I would guide you to that, and I'm sure you'll have fun browsing through it. And then finally, my vision for how this reaches scale is very much through the connection of provinces like yours experimenting and doing this work and learning by doing, and then connecting to other bioregions who are doing the same thing in a global network, which is how living systems actually create change. So imagine, this is a map of Europe, not divided by nation states, which are a reductionist political reality, but not the way living systems self-organize. Here you see the actual watersheds across Europe. And so, a province like yours is a piece of a watershed. And if we all begin to think about building regenerative economies, dealing with a holistic approach within each of our bioregions, and then connect each of these bioregions, we will see emerging essentially an entirely new economic and social and societal order that is much more in alignment with how living systems actually work. So in closing, I was recently it was suggested to me to read Bucky Fuller's last book that most people have never heard of. It's called Grunch. And I was blown away because I knew of Bucky Fuller, but I never heard him use this regenerative language. And it was sort of his farewell message to humanity. It was published the year he died. And if you read it, you can tell he was very much sharing his advice for us. And toward the end of the book, he says, nature is a totally efficient, self-regenerating system. If we discover the laws that govern this system and live synergistically within them, sustainability will follow and humankind will be a success. And I couldn't say it better myself. So thanks so much for bearing with me, and I look forward to seeing what comes up from all that.
Well, thank you, John. That was a very interesting story. I have quite a few number of questions received from the people listening, so I'll go over some, and maybe some of the participants can just ask the questions themselves, because of course that's even nicer. To start with, I'll go a little bit across the themes that you touched upon. There was one question that I was curious about myself, whether you think that we were going to have a lot more crises in the world, like the pandemic we're having now, whether we need that as human beings in order to realize that we need to make the switch, and even more, actually make the switch. Do we need to have the water here before we move? Is that what happens?
Spoken only as a Dutch person can say about the water. I think we do. I think systems and institutions don't change unless they're forced to by pressure. And that is actually true. Like, you put a pot of water on the stove and it doesn't change until you turn up the heat. And so, when I gave my reflection on my wish in our little sessions at the beginning, right, what came up for me was that since the beginning of this century, beginning with 9/11 and my personal experience in that, and you can go back earlier than that, but obviously kind of exponentially in this century, we've been given by the universe these crises, from 9/11, the financial crisis, the refugee crisis, and now the pandemic and the associated economic crisis. These are the universe turning up the heat. And so I think it's a fool's errand to predict the future in complex systems like we're in, but I would bet a lot that we will have not only more crises, but accelerating crises. And that's not good news, but the good news in that is that is actually what will force us to change. So we don't need to worry about our theories of change. We need to learn to dance with complexity and adapt to it and grow with it and learn with it. And the pressure will be the theory of change is the pressure is rising, as far as I'm concerned.
Right. And listening to your story, I saw somewhere on the slide deck that you mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals just very slightly. Don't you think we should use those or integrate those in the way we think because of the interconnection of all the themes? That's why they have been developed in the first place. Is that something you work with?
Yeah, I appreciate you raising that, and I love the Sustainable Development Goals, but they're reductionist, right? They're as long as so I would rather every bioregion solve for all of the SDGs at one time in one place than for one company to work on 3 and another company to work on 2, and because the magic will be the co-benefits that arise. So for example, the aquaponic hydroponic system, which is a highly regenerative system, potentially can solve all SDGs all at one time in one project. Now, not for the whole world, but if it's then scaled out and implemented across the world, it deals with, literally we could go through all of them and it would tick the box. There's Kate Raworth's donut is a beautiful visualization of, largely the SDGs in a picture. There's some differences, obviously. But there's been, going back to, I think certainly the 80s or 90s, the human progress indicators. I mean, we've got indicators coming out of our ears. What we don't have is a compass on how to actually move in a direction other than trying to incrementally problem solve. And it's problem solving is kind of like whack-a-mole. You think you fixed it and then it pops up over here. And so we need to step back. And I think the idea of the principles are not to displace the SDGs. They're a way to provide a compass to navigate so that the SDGs emerge organically because of the system design rather than because we manage away our problems. That's maybe the best way to think about it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there's one participant, she has a lot of questions. Her name is Elena. Maybe Elena, I think it's nice if you ask some of your questions yourself to John instead of me repeating them. Can you open your microphone, please?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I had a question on the pressure message of the Earth, because I agree that the Earth gives enough pressure messages, but we are not really listening because the problems keep getting worse and nobody feels personally responsible. So companies won't do anything because if I do something, then I will not make enough profit, and governments won't do anything on their own because if I do this, then the other governments will become better and I will lose. So how would you interfere and solve that problem?
Well, I mean, if I knew the answer to that, we wouldn't be sitting here. But Elaine and I shared, we were in the opening conversation together, and so thank you for jumping to ask the hard question. I think things are shifting more than we see them, even though they're not shifting fast enough. And if you think about, again, unexpected things that are going to likely be the answer to your question, no one had in their theory of change on how to do this for a little girl in Sweden to sit outside the government office and refuse to go to school. So as the pressure rises, we will be surprised by other events that no one is talking about or planning, and certainly no one can foresee. And that's the way the Berlin Wall fell down. That's the way complex systems change. And I'm not smart enough to know what they will be, but I truly believe and remain hopeful that if we can all collectively see that the challenge is to gradually move toward this regenerative framework, which is the proof, the proof is that actually is sustainable. And by the way, this is completely in alignment with the indigenous wisdom that has stood the test of time. You could argue it's just a translation of indigenous wisdom. So the only human culture that has survived forever already understands this intuitively and innately. And we, in our brilliance, particularly in the Western world, have gone off on this pursuit of progress, and we've achieved great things, but we've missed some things. And so, I guess my way of behaving and acting in the world is to find opportunities to nudge us toward a different way of seeing the problem and getting passionate around this the magic of this regenerative process. And then having some faith that this system will self-correct, because it is a living system. But I don't think it's useful for us to sort of look at it and say, well, there's no answer to this, therefore I throw up my hands, because it would be easy to do that. And all I can encourage us all to do, and what I've chosen to do, is to try to act and behave in as holistic a way possible, and take the risks, particularly those of us that are privileged to have the resources to take the risks. But it's not easy, not at all. And CEOs of big companies that try to take these risks often get thrown out of their jobs. So we need to be compassionate with them about the constraints they operate under as well. But thanks for asking it.
Thank you. Well, we have a lot of other questions as well. Let me see how to go about this without making it too more complicated. One question from Bart first is, he wanted to know what in your opinion, is the role of the government in this whole shift. What can they do, local, internationally, nationally, and also appreciating the fact that they are typically, of course, in a, following a route, a political route, a program that's been written. How can they keep on working towards it?
I think again, a really hard. I've never been a politician, but I understand enough the constraints that politicians operate under. I think we need politicians who are willing to risk everything, including their career, at nudging the system in this new direction. And that's asking a lot of people. But I don't see the institution of government leading us if it remains trapped in the modern age conventional thinking, which by definition is what it's about. The easy steps are frankly projects like you're working on right there with the entrepreneurs. If you create the conditions for entrepreneurial innovation to thrive, then that energy will do the work for you. So small subsidies, browbeat the big companies in your bioregion to support that effort. browbeat the wealthy people who have plenty of resources to support those efforts. So Janine Benyus, who's sort of a biomimicry frame, likes to use the phrase, life creates the conditions for life. And so government, which ultimately has nothing but the well-being of society as its purpose, can fall into this same framework by helping to create the conditions for life. And if I were to look at, you know, your bioregion and looking at how agriculturally intense it is, and by the way, New York State has decided to do this. They had an initiative to try to become carbon neutral, and they realized they could never get there without agriculture. So the New York State government now has all kinds of programs measured in billions of dollars to transition the entire state. And upstate New York looks a lot like you know, your region. It's mostly farms, mostly struggling farmers. But if they can shift agriculture to regenerative agriculture, even though agriculture isn't sexy the way technology is, it's probably the core foundation of humans, or it is the core foundation of human society. So shifting, you know, if I had one wish for the minister listening, it would be to embrace regenerative agriculture as a formal policy of the region, and become the first region in Holland to become 100% regenerative agriculture. And the spin-off benefits of that, from healthy water to less toxins in the environment, to more jobs in agriculture, more young people involved, to healthier food, to less health problems, will be exponential. So that's one suggestion I could make.
Mm-hmm. Well, Inge comments that would be really awesome. So
and don't just settle for organic. Go 100% to regenerative, and it's possible. Right. And you will make more money. Farmers will make more money doing it. It's proven in other parts of the world.
Yeah, be the change, huh?
And therefore pay more taxes.
Yeah. I also have a question, which is a nice one actually, from Caroline Hummel. Caroline, would you pose your question, please?
Let me start by thanking you for your very lovely presentation. I was really taken by it. Also because I'm working myself, I'm a professor here at Industrial Design, working in similar areas. I don't know if you know Edgar Morin on complexity. Yeah. If not, definitely read it, because he's very much aligned by you with your work.
Good. There's two of us.
And Edgar Morin basically he, by the way, he would criticize your holistic, because he said it's even more than holistic and reductionist, because it's mixing the both sides, but that's other sidetrack. What
well, I should say I am a student of complexity science. I am not an academic, so
okay.
I'll read the book.
But what he's also stating is he's really emphasizing transdisciplinarity. So he's really trying to figure out and saying, like, if we want to address this from a complexity, we also need the different disciplines, the different backgrounds, etc. And partly we're trying to do that in this region, but we also notice that it's quite difficult since we're speaking different languages. So for me, from a design language, is different than your language, is different than a governmental language. So I was wondering how you, in your own practice, how you tackle that. How do you make sure, because we talked about complexity, how you make sure to communicate and to kind of use each other's forces to actually move forward?
You know, that's I'm glad you raised that. It's a really critical challenge, and I'm sure you've all had. In fact, I saw it in the notes of the first round of the fund, comments about the need to invest more time in communication and clarifying language. And there is no, we are trapped in the system we've created, which is a group of vertical specialists. You know, wait till you hear me start talking about derivatives. I mean, it's like you'll have no idea what I'm talking about. Again, I think the only way to address this is to invest if you think about any process that we're involved in, whether it's the second fund or the next tenure of my appointment, or the 5-year plan of my business, this is where we need to invest 100x more time and energy up front to get some of that stuff right, to build trust, to build clarity on what we are talking about, to be clarity about what we actually mean when we say X, Y, Z. As you said, just within complexity science, there's all kinds of different complexity sciences, and they're not all living systems. Some of it's just math, and so you can be in a conversation with someone talking about complexity and have a very different implication of it, because living systems are unique, complex systems that have their own qualities and characteristics. And the hypothesis is here that the human economy is a living system. We can debate that, but if you accept that as true, then it stands to reason that we have to use living systems as our framework and as our compass. And whether you use my 8 principles or your 8 principles that are better, it doesn't matter. What matters is that we see that opportunity, or the necessity as well as the opportunity the same way. And everything, when you get a physicist and a chemist in a room with an English scholar and a business person, it's almost impossible unless you get above all that and leave all of that at the door and talk about the higher level patterns and principles. That's my only suggestion.
Can I then maybe ask one really tiny short question? By the way, Morin is about living systems, so you will like him.
Okay.
So what do you see as a time scale? What do you hope, at least? Will you still be alive when we really get the I mean, I'm asking those questions myself too, so.
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
Well, that's an honest question. Answer.
Yeah. I think that it's a very nice discussion and a very nice exchange, but I'm looking at the time, and Joyce and we are responsible for the time schedule, and we promised to stop at 5 o'clock. So yeah, there are still a lot of questions, and for me, I got a lot of inspiration. I would like to share with all the people in the group, but maybe we can figure out how to do that, to share our thoughts and what comes out of in our minds, which we can't share at the moment, and share it together in a written way. We will think about it with the team, how to, give a next follow-up on this. So I would like to end the discussion or exchange on this, and would like to thank John very much for your thoughts and experiences, and also the wisdom you bring in this conversation, and all the participants for sharing their questions. I would give the floor to Astrid to end this session, just to give a little bit to look to the future, what kind of next actions the Brabant Outcomes Fund will do and is working on at the moment. So Astrid, I give you the final floor.
Yes, I will. But first of all, John, thanks a lot for all your inspiration. And I hope we can continue this conversation another time, because I think it's very worthwhile. So, but because it's already 5 o'clock, I only want to mention that we will continue to have this kind of inspirational moments. And the next one is the 1st of April. Then we will talk about true pricing, and Michel Scholte is our guest then. He is also elected as the Minister of the New Economy. So I think that will also be a very interesting discussion that we can have with him. But I also want to ask all of you, if you have any suggestions of a next speaker, just let us know, and then we will try to arrange it, because I think it's good that we stay connected and we give each other inspiration. So I think that's it for now. Then I hope to see you all again on the 1st of April.